Hello, I'm Clark Evans, and we're going to have some Pluto fun with Hypertext Literal. This is a library that lets you build HTML and SVG, handling string escaping for you. If you know how to use Julia's string interpolation and list comprehensions, you're halfway there. Hypertext Literal is happily documented, and it's fast. Most importantly, it's quite extensible. Anyhow, let's show you how to use it in Pluto. What you see here is a dashboard made with Pluto. This is some synthetic patient data coming from a relational database. On the top, we have some patient records, person ID and gender, and below we have the visits for that person. As you move the slider, we can sort of move through the database. There's a checkbox here which says if we want to see the source, which is where the data comes from, it adds an extra slot here, and as you move back and forth, you can see it. In any case, both of these tables are made with hypertext literal. And while you can look at the text below here, you can see a caption is here and it's grabbing the current person and grabbing their ID and putting it there. And then here it's looping through all of the records and showing the various column entries. So the data we just saw comes from a Postgres Odyssey database called SimPuff 5%. And above we have a bunch of boilerplate to connect to it. We're going to build a query in order to pull the data from the database using a library called FunSQL, which we're currently working on. Here we set up the person and visit objects, namely the top part of the data we saw, and then that list below for each person. And then we're constructing a query. And this is basically persons where the person ID is equal to that selected person ID. Well, the selected person ID is coming from the slider above. And then we return a few columns. And here, to make it interesting, I've decided that if the show source checkbox is clicked, we're going to add this extra slot. Now, that could be a very expensive calculation that you might not want to use on every single query, but here we just show it to be simple. Below is the automatically generated query, and then from that, we can see when you run the query, the results. So I was pleasantly surprised that Pluto had built-in handling of query results right out of the box. libpq objects use the tables interface, and Pluto cheerfully renders them. But even so, they're not quite as nice as I'd like. So I started by mocking up a little bit of how I'd like it to look differently. In this case, I'd like to use definition lists because this is just going to be a single record. And once I have the definition list looking the way I wanted, I moved on to modeling the same thing using hypertext literal. It's almost the same. The only difference is that, well, you have some interpolation going on, which will of course be properly escaped if these happen to be string values. Once you have those together, HTL will gladly render them this way for you, and Pluto shows it, which is perfect. If you were to go up to the very top and scroll back and forth with the slider, these values would actually be changed. Oh, we can't stop now. That would be boring. What if the template itself should also be changing based upon, let's say, a Pluto checkbox? Well, I got this to work, but it's a bit tricky. Observe that the result set objects list the columns it returns. The checkbox must be checked now because, well, you see the source value right here. Well, let's go ahead and see if we can build the template above a little bit more dynamically using these column names returned. And in here, we start the definition list. We go ahead and join each one of the column names together, making sure to put a field label on it, and then grabbing the current value from the current record. And this is our template. And then we're going to do something truly nasty. Well, we're going to define a function called person row that takes in the current row object, and it's going to evaluate the template so that this evaluated template creates a closure, and that closure is the function body for the person row. And well, it can't use we can't use the macro directly. We need to eval it. And unfortunately, Pluto's not going to know anything about that. So we put show source here in the front so that whenever show source changes, this gets reevaluated, which gives us a new template function. In any case, the template actually works, and you could use it real easily. You could just grab your current person object, current person record, and call the function on it, and boom, there you go. Isn't that pretty? Well, it's not aesthetically pleasing, but it is in fact what we started this talk with. If you go up to the very top, we can see that this is the same definition list, and if you expand, you can see the source code. The only difference is that we have some style sheet we found on the internet on the front, and there it is, there's our call. And once you put it all together, it works sort of beautifully. You can use your slider. Every single time you move your slider, it'll fetch new rows. You can use a checkbox, and this will cause your template to actually change. And that's sort of how it all comes together. One last topic. Wouldn't it be nice to make your custom data type show beautifully in Pluto? Here we have an example of a data type with a text body and an optional style. In order to convert instances of this data type into HTML, we have to override base.show for the MIME type text.html, and then we can delegate that to HypertextLiteral. In this case, the attributes are expanded into a span tag, the data will be properly escaped, and the style will be smartly handled. This lets you do things like this. My custom data type is properly escaped, and you can provide text decorations, color, or any other CSS style right here, and it just works. And that's it. Thank you all for listening.
Okay, thank you, Clark. This is really an amazing tool. I would like to mention the context here. So we, as Pluto developers, really want this was a tool that was missing from Pluto's ecosystem, basically. And Clark had an entirely different reason for needing hypertext literal, and we came together and Clark worked on this. So thank you again. I think this will be super useful to lots of Pluto users. Yeah, okay. So one question from the audience was, can we use CSS? And you showed it a bit in your talk, but can you show the last thing maybe one more time? Like, how can you dynamically create styles? How does that work?
So I think you can, there's documentation for, in the documentation, it shows how you would just have a dictionary that can be serialized. And if I can find if I click on the documentation really quick, I can try to share screen. But anyway, it is there that and once you have a dictionary, you can pass that into your template, and it will then be expanded into the right into the right attributes or the right format. Other than that, I don't know what that question would mean exactly. We don't. Well, one thing that hypertext literal does is it parses the HTML, and then in order to show it, it can then expand the variables in the correct context that they're found in. So if you really wanted very detailed style parsing, here is a very end where making something with a custom CSS tag, and then you basically are serializing it. And here I have my style object, and it is expanded. In order to do anything like, there's one thing that popped out at me is that in the context sensitive, because we know where the tags are, like style and script. When I was watching when I was watching Fonz do his demo, I noticed that he was often inside a script tag, and maybe the interpolation of a Julia variable in a script tag might want to be different than in the regular tag. You can do this if you look at the various content extensions, and you can start off with as you're doing it, you can say, when I'm found in a content, if I have a custom data type and you're in a content, then expand it this way. But you can also do the same thing with attributes. You can say, if you're in an attribute, expand it this way instead. And this allows you to do things like integrating the CSS units from HyperScript. So one thing I was thinking about is maybe HypertextLiteral also needs a JavaScript tag here, to where when you're expanding Julia objects in a script tag, it behaves differently. So I don't know if I answered the question, but there is quite a bit of CSS support. Actually, parsing CSS tags inside a script we have not done, and I don't know if we will do it, but certainly a patch request would be welcome.
Awesome. Sorry, Panagiotis, you go.
No, I think I'm quite covered. It's quite extensive what you can do. And as I understand it, it's pretty holistic in its approach to how to handle anything that you can interpolate. So great job, Clark. That is amazing.
I would mention that the primitives are really very small amount of things you need in order to build it. And I proposed a talk for JuliaCon to go over that, the innards and how it was all put together.
So something that I was really impressed by, so I would like to mention it, was the testing and documentation. Could you say something about how you test the package?
Sure. The tests are written using something that Kirill Simonov wrote. Which is which we call the literal test. So GitHub Mechanical Rabbit. Where's Mechanical Rabbit? Kirill wrote this utility called narrative test, and it's kind of cool. It doubles as both documentation and test cases. So as you're busily making your test to work, you can just document what you're doing, and then anything that's indented will be executed. If it has right after some Julia code, if you do pound and then an arrow, you can have a single line expected value. And of course, you can also do multi-line outputs. And if you use this character here, you can, the ... this could be very long, and it'll prune them out. Almost all of our documentation for data knots and Fun SQL and other things that we've done are using this narrative test library.
Yeah, just coming back to Fun SQL, I know it's not the topic of the talk, but it looks very interesting, and I will definitely take a look at it later. Because I think this was something SQL Alchemy like for the Julia ecosystem. Yeah, looks very good.
It will be a few months before we're finished. We have a prototype, but we want to design it and have it really beautifully documented before we announce it publicly. But right now, it only does some limited queries. But I would say if you give it a few more months, it should be very, very usable.
Good.
That sounds great. I know that Panagiotis is excited right now when he hears this.
Yeah, I love anything that has to do with SQL, because it comes the day where you need to write a huge query, and you would wish to be able to break that into small parts that also use reactivity, and it is exciting to see this effort coming alive.
Yeah,
I think you can expect a release about every week or so. We'll be documenting it as we go, and of course, if you want to ping us, you can join us on Zulip.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you for your talk. Thanks again. We'll go on to the next one, teaching computer science and algorithms using Pluto. Thank you, Clark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clark.